Good evening. Welcome to the Trinity channel. And today we have a very, very special show for you. Today we're going to have a live discussion between our own David Wood, Dr. David Wood, I'm sorry.
You can call me David.
Don't beat me after the show.
We are friends, dude. We are friends.
And Mr. Farhan Qureshi, who has appeared on the show before. And these brothers of ours are going to discuss the topic, how should we confront the Islamic challenge? And during this time, you could call it debate, discussion, whatever you want to call it, they're gonna talk about just how should we approach our apologetics and our evangelism. Last night, if you tuned in, you heard a lot of verses. One of the verses you heard was 1 Peter 3:15. And in 1 Peter 3:15, at the end of the verse, it says to offer a defense of the faith with gentleness, but also with truth. So how do we balance gentleness and truth? We're going to discuss that tonight, and we're going to come to a conclusion. So we're going to have opening statements from both of our participants, both being 8 minutes. And the first opening statement is going to be from Dr. David Wood for 8 minutes.
We ready?
Are you ready?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Good. All right, well, good evening, everyone. And, of course, this is a very important topic. If you've noticed, there is a massive problem in the world. And, you know, the one we've been focusing on is ISIS, where people have had their heads chopped off on a seemingly daily basis, where large sections of entire countries are being taken over by straightforward jihadists, and women are being raped. It's a really bad situation, but even though we've been focusing on ISIS, ISIS isn't the only problem. You also have Boko Haram kidnapping women left and right, raping them and sometimes ransoming them back, sometimes marrying them off. You have Al-Shabaab in Somalia. You have the Taliban in Pakistan and Afghanistan. You have Al-Qaeda still trying to get the attention back on them. You have all kinds of terrorist groups who somehow, despite the fact that they come from very different countries, somehow come to conclude that they are commanded to wage jihad, and that this is how they're supposed to go about serving Allah in this world. So there's obviously a challenge, and we're here to address how to confront that challenge. And this can be a different issue depending on whether you're Christian or non-Muslim, whether you're a government leader or a regular person. I'm assuming that Farhan and I aren't talking about what the military needs to do or what the government or the United Nations needs to do. When we talk about how should we confront the Islamic challenge, I'm assuming we're talking about people like us, average people in the world. What can we actually do about this challenge? And there was a famous little bit with Ben Affleck recently where he threw a big tantrum on Real Talk because Bill Maher and Sam Harris had the nerve to say that Islam is more dangerous than other religions and other ideologies. And most of what Ben Affleck said, I think, is ridiculous. But he said one very important thing, and it was a question. He sort of lifted his head and said, "So what's your solution?" And I think that is a very important question, one which we're here to address tonight. What's the solution? Because if you think about it, if you run around telling everyone that Islam is violent, that it calls for jihad, that it allows men to rape their female captives, that Islam is all about dominating and subjugating the entire world. Well, suppose lots of people, suppose the entire population becomes convinced that that's what Islam teaches. You have to wonder, what are the odds that someone's going to go targeting random Muslims who aren't waging jihad, right? That seems like a legitimate concern. If everyone becomes convinced that Islam is violent and dangerous, what about, the nice Muslim who lives down the street and is just working his job and has never thought about jihad in his life? Well, that's a concern, and so the question is, how do we sort of work through this issue? We want to confront the Islamic challenge, but at the same time, we don't want people hurt. I don't want to see anyone hurt. I would rather see ISIS all change their minds about what jihad is and what Islam teaches and whether Islam is true, and turn away from all of those things. That's what I would like to see. That's not going to happen. So we have to say, what can we do here, right? Here and now. And my view is simple and peaceful. Ben Affleck wanted to know what the solution is. My solution would be peaceful and simple. Of course, there's going to have to be military engagements and governments protecting people and stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people like us. What can we do? I believe that Islam cannot withstand criticism. Islam cannot withstand open, straightforward criticism. When we're talking about Muhammad, we're talking about a guy who had sex with a 9-year-old girl, who had more wives than his own revelations allowed to Muslims. A guy who married the divorced wife of his own adopted son after he caused the breakup. We're talking about a guy whose first impression of his revelations was that they were demonic. We're talking about a guy who became suicidal after receiving his revelations, tried to hurl himself off a cliff. A guy who delivered revelations to his followers, then came back and said the devil tricked him into delivering those revelations. We're talking about a guy who started acting weird for about a year and a half, came back and said it was because someone had cast a magic spell on him. This is probably the least reliable person in all of history that you could choose as a prophet, and yet your average Muslim doesn't know anything about any of this. Why? Their leaders keep them insulated from these facts about Muhammad because they don't want them to leave Islam. And when people convert to Islam in the West, I have never met a person who converted to Islam after doing a careful study of the Quran and the Hadith. Why? Because they would have found out, wow, this guy really, really doesn't look like a prophet. Based on the fact that Muslims are keeping this material, and I mean Muslim leaders, based on the fact that Muslim leaders are keeping this material hidden from your average Muslim, and the fact that people just don't convert to Islam after studying this material, I conclude that there's a reason for it. That once all the facts are on the table, most people would either not become Muslim or certainly wouldn't have very much confidence in it. I'm not saying everyone is like that. You could read all the Quran and the Hadith and just love it. Go out there, wage jihad, and take your captives and all these things. You could do that, but the point is, I don't think most people would. I don't think once all of the facts about Muhammad are on the table, I don't think that most people are going to take it seriously. So my solution would be that we need to get the facts about Muhammad. And by the way, it's not like there's a solution. There are all kinds of things that need to get done. What I'm talking about is, if I could sort of change one thing and get one thing sort of out there, it would be to get the facts about Muhammad into the realm of common knowledge, so that wherever you go, people know what Islam teaches about women and about how men can beat their wives and take captives and so on, what it teaches about women, what it teaches about jihad, Muhammad's life, to get these into the realm of common knowledge. If that can happen, one, I don't think you're going to see too many people converting to Islam, and so you're not going to have these sort of lone wolf jihadists who converted to Islam. And I think you'll have more people leaving Islam, and even the people who still are Muslims, I don't think that many of them are going to have the confidence, if they really know a lot of the facts about Muhammad, to run out and wage jihad. Why do I say that? Because when I look at the jihadist pages, I see some of the silliest nonsense about Muhammad ever. And it's very silly if you've read the history of Muhammad, some of the things they're saying. So there's a great deal of ignorance out there. If we can break through that ignorance and get the facts on the table, I think everyone's better off. I think non-Muslims are better off.
40 seconds.
I think non-Muslims are better off. I also think peaceful Muslims in the West are better off. If we are allowed to openly discuss and even criticize Islam, which we can't do now, you'd be called a racist and a bigot and a hate monger and everything. If we are able to openly discuss and criticize Islam, I think that will reduce a lot of the people's concerns about Islam, if they can just talk about it. And I think even Muslims, peaceful Muslims in the West, are better off if we can openly, honestly discuss their prophet and their book.
Thank you very much for that opening statement.
And
8 minutes of opening statement Thank you
very
for
much
the
for
position of using a more direct approach in apologetics. Now for a direct opening statement from Farhan Qureshi, who is coming with the opposite opinion.
Is he?
Taking the opposite.
I think Farhan might agree with me on a lot of what I just said. Let's see.
It might happen. It just might happen. But we'll let Farhan tell us that. So, Farhan, you have 8 minutes to give us your position, starting now.
Okay, sure. Now, I mean, in terms of whether I agree with David or not, I do agree with David. I think that the tactics that we might employ are a bit different, and perhaps that I'm a little bit more sensitive towards people in general in terms of how they would emotionally respond to some of that open criticism to Islam, and I'll get into that a little bit. But what I do want to cover first and foremost is to say that nobody can have a monopoly on any religion, and if there are 1.4 billion individuals who profess Islam, then inevitably there are going to be 1.4 subjective perceptions on what Islam is, and the argument over who is right or wrong could go on forever. And even when exegesis or original interpretation is attempted, sectarianism surfaces its face and challenges any claims being made. And so when we deal with such a large population of people, we should realize that in the midst of this population, naturally there's going to be human personalities who incline toward a range of thoughts, beliefs, and behaviors. There's going to be professed Muslims who are delusional, stubborn, rigid, hostile, emotional, irrational, violent, ignorant, and uneducated, just as much as there will be benevolent, spiritual, rational, intelligent, peaceful, and educated Muslims out there as well. Both sides of the spectrum exist, and every possibility in between does as well. Each side of the spectrum focuses on passages, verses, and narrations that further their personal approach. The rigid conservatives will further their attitudes by quoting passages that justify their means, and the passive liberals will quote passages that justify their means. The same can be said of any religion. It's simply a matter of specific personality types having the means that they are looking for to express themselves. And so that's the first point that I wanted to cover, is that when we're dealing with such a big population, there's going to be all sorts of people that we're dealing with, and their biochemical makeup, their personalities, their conditioning is going to influence how they perceive Islam and what types of verses they're influenced by. And so when we look at Islam, we want to look at it from different angles. We want to look at the whole picture, but we want to look at it from different angles. So first we can ask questions from a theological perspective, we can ask questions from a psychological, sociological, and cultural perspective, and also we can go and look at it from a political and diplomatic perspective as well. And I know that you don't want to get into the politics of it, and that's fine. But first and foremost, I guess my question to you was, I'm gonna posit some questions that from a theological perspective, we talked about gentleness in the beginning. We talked about love your enemy. We talk, there's other verses like that, turn the other cheek and stuff like that. And so when we look at those verses, within the context of those passages, how can we confront, hostile Muslims? Is it truly gentle and polite and inviting to pretty much tell Muslims that their prophet's a pedophile, he married all these women, the entire list of what you said, you want all the facts about Muhammad out there. But in terms of tactics, is that a reasonable and is it a feasible approach, in the spirit of turning the other cheek and loving your enemy and so on and so forth? What is the reaction or response you're going to get when you come out with all of these quote-unquote facts? And a lot of those things are facts. I'm not saying that they're not, but it's how you present those facts and how the other person perceives what it is that you're presenting them. And I think that that's a very important a tactic and methodology in terms of whether the Muslim is going to be insulted and offended and is going to become defensive and defense mechanisms are going to come into play, or whether they're going to be receptive and actually want to listen to what you have to say. And so that theological question is what I want to start off with. So the second question that I had to do with theodicy, since David and I engaged the problem of evil before. In that evil exists, and whether it emerges through Islam or any other means, that it is a part of God's plan. And so the idea is to respond to it through compassion and not more hostility. But I don't think David is going to disagree with that, right? So I think what we're eventually going to get into is our tactics and how we present the facts that we want to present, and whether it's right and ethical to present facts the way that David and others have presented them, that have provoked Muslim behaviors, to say the least. Now, what I will say is that there is an emotional attachment that comes along with being a Muslim, or being anything for that matter. It doesn't matter if it's racial, ethnic, cultural. There's an emotional attachment to one. How much time? Okay. So if there's an emotional attachment to one's identity, and that identity is challenged or offended in any type of way, then you're going to get a reaction and you're going to push people away. And so my question is, do you want to push them away, or do you want to soften their hearts first and then get into some of those facts that you want to get into? And how are you going to present? Are you going to call Muhammad a pedophile, or are you going to say, look, is this how you want modern day society to deal with marrying off children and whatnot? And see, the way that I presented it, a Muslim might be willing to hear me out, but the way David presented it in his opening statement, in my opinion, that's going to push people away, and that's what I definitely want to enforce. But not only that, when you think about the peaceful Muslims who are willing to listen, do you want to push them away, or do you want them to listen? And that's a big piece of what I guess the concern that I've had, and concerns that Muslims that I've talked to have had when talking to what they call Islamophobes. I think that they have their own Westophobia issues themselves, but we're not going to get into those. So the question comes down to tactics, Dave. And not so much whether we need to confront these issues or not. I'm all about criticizing Islam and Muhammad, but in the right way, and in a way that Muslims are willing to listen and hear what you have to say. And one way to do that is to acknowledge the good things that do come with Islam, the good things that do come with Muhammad. What's that?
40 seconds left.
Okay, so I'll conclude with that, and if there's any other points, I'll make them in the rebuttal.
Farhan, you good with 4-minute rebuttals?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
All right, so we move into the next part, which is the rebuttal, which are going to be 4 minutes each. So starting with David, you have your 4 minutes to rebut his points.
All right, now Farhan's first point was that there are subjective interpretations, subjective perspectives on Islam, because human beings aren't the sort of things that just get a command and then that they're just set in that way. In other words, you don't end up with if 1.4 or 1.6 billion Muslims say they follow Islam, you're not going to end up with 1.4 or 1.6 billion people believing and doing the exact same things. Why? Because there are a lot more influences on us than just the religion we believe in. With that said, which I agree with that said, think about it. Christianity has many different individuals, different backgrounds, different genetic makeups. So does Hinduism and so on. And yet it's one particular ideology that continually ends up promoting terrorism and suicide bombings and beheadings and honor killings and all of these things. So the point is, given that people are different, there is something about Islam that is more than just personal, private perspective, because people in completely different areas end up doing the same thing. Not everyone, but to a much higher degree than other ideologies. And so we're not just talking about personal perspective here. There's something more there. Farhan wants to know if it's reasonable to share the facts about Muhammad with Muslims. I think he concluded that he did. And I would agree with that. I think people need to get it. And as far as tactics are concerned, I never walked up to a Muslim and said your prophet's a pedophile or anything like that. I do want to get the point across that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl. You can do that in a gentle manner. You can say, hey, I just read this article, or I read the hadith. It says this about Muhammad. I was wondering what you, my Muslim friend, think about that. I'm wondering what you think about that sort of thing. And could you, talk to your mom, get back to me, and share your views with me? So I'm fine with that. I don't run around in the street saying, I hate you Muslims, and never done it. Now, I am far more aggressive, I think, than lots of people in that I will say it, I will put it on the internet, I'll make YouTube videos. I'm certainly very cheeky and sarcastic in my videos. I would say I make fun of Muhammad in my videos. Not because I'm saying that's the way to do things, but because there are already Christians who are very nice and very loving, doing things like that. I'm kind of focusing on a different sort of group. I'm focusing on people who are more aggressive. And I'm sure Farhan knows this. There are lots of Muslims in the world who come from a more aggressive background. They only listen to you if you're more forceful. They don't respect it if you're just laid back and gentle. They regard it as weakness. I found this out in my early interactions with Nabil. We would watch a debate. I would think it was completely one-sided massacre, and Nabil would say the Muslim one, and I would be saying, how can you say the Muslim one when he started yelling and screaming because he didn't have any arguments? And Nabil's perspective was, he was yelling and screaming because he was passionate, because he knows the truth is on his side. So in the West, we look at something like that and say, this guy's yelling because he knows he's losing. Whereas certain people will look at that and say he's yelling because he's passionate that he has the truth. And so there are different perspectives, but I just want to say, Farhan, from personal experience, I hear from former Muslims regularly who said, look, man, I was really ticked off when I started watching your videos, but I just wanted to watch them so I could refute them, and then they end up becoming, either leaving Islam, becoming Christian, or leaving Islam and becoming agnostic. But I hear from that regularly. So there are people who do respond to a more confrontational approach. By the way, I'm the same way. I respond to a more confrontational approach rather than someone, tiptoeing around. And so it's basically there are different approaches for different kinds of people, and I'm sure you would agree with that.
Thank you, David. And now for Farhan, it's time for your time to rebut. Are you there, Farhan?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great.
The clock is set. Your time is ready.
Okay, so no, I understand what you're saying in terms of, the confrontational approach and how it does get to someone, but you have to put into play there that you could be potentially pushing people away that are more susceptible to hearing, Christ's message or something alternative. And that possibility is out there as well. And the reality situation is the ones that are already hostile, the ones that are already rigid, you're only going to push them further and further into their delusion by confronting them the way that you do. There are many cases where you do that as well. Now even I, and you know this, Dave, like when I used to hear some of the things that you said, I was offended, but I was also listening to a variety of different perspectives, variety of different speakers on a variety of different topics, and ultimately that led me, out of Islam. And so there are always different voices, but it all depends on who you're listening to. And the idea is that if you're going to be confrontational, you have to realize that you might be pushing people away as well. And is it worth it, especially if when you're dealing with confrontational people, if you're making their faith stronger rather than humbling them to the truth? The other thing, you said something about the population and subjective perception. And I agree that every religion has a foundation. For example, Islam has a kalima, or, each one has a creed, right? But from that basic perspective, even from the foundation, I would say that each individual has a subjective perception of that foundation. So, for example, UNCL, while you have a foundation that Christ is your Lord and Savior, how you each individually perceive that and how you interpret it in terms of what's going on in reality, in terms of what's going on in life, is different. No matter what symbols or languages or words you use that are similar, each of you has a unique perception on what that means to you specifically. And so there is a subjective aspect to religion and how people interpret it. And like I said, passive liberals are going to pursue verses to justify their means, and rigid conservatives are going to pursue passages and verses that justify their means. And so that's just the nature of what we're talking about. Now, I don't find too much disagreement about, putting the facts out there. In the gentle way that you put your facts out there about Muhammad's controversial marriage to Aisha, the way you did it there was perfect. It seemed like it was a genuine way to inquire about a controversial issue without provoking them to either react or feel insulted, and now you've pushed them away. I guess my question to you, Dave, is do you feel that you are pushing people away? And in terms of those who are confrontational, do you think that you're just making them more confrontational and more hostile? Do you think that that's a possibility? And in the end, is it worth it? And then when you translate that onto a bigger scale, you get terrorism because people are being provoked. And that's dangerous. For example, the Quran burner in Florida, he literally caused people to go nuts. And that's what we have to be very careful with our tactics, and especially when we're looking at biblical suggestions on how we should deal with it. I think that, as Christians, you guys should follow whatever those suggestions are. And if you have any verses that would imply that, confront hostility with hostility, then I would like to hear those verses as well.
Thank you. And that was the opening statements. We had 2 opening statements, each 8 minutes, and we had 2 rebuttals, each 4 minutes. And we're going to take a slight break at this point for 60 seconds, and just stay tuned. Don't go anywhere, because there's going to be more dialogue, and there's going to be some back and forth questioning going between our debaters, and you want to check that out, so stay around. And we are back, the Trinity Channel. We have today Farhan Qureshi, and we have David Wood, and we're discussing how should we confront the Islamic challenge. In a previous segment, we had opening statements and rebuttals. And now in this part, we're going to have like an open discussion, a back and forth between our 2 debaters. And we're going to start off with David. He's going to open up the discussion and ask Farhan a few questions.
Yeah, Farhan, we certainly want to get to the tactics, but at the end it sounded like you were asking if there's any basis in Christianity for being confrontational. And absolutely, I think I'm far less confrontational than Jesus was. I think I'm far less confrontational than Paul was. And this is, let me give you an example. This is Jesus talking to the scribes and Pharisees. He says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door to the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. When you have succeeded, you make them twice as much of a child of hell as you are." These are very strong words, and this just continues, right? I mean, he's just blasting people. And you find Paul doing the same thing in various circumstances. But as someone, I think it was John Eldridge who pointed out, who was Jesus more like, he asked. Was he more like William Wallace or Mother Teresa, right? Was he gentle and loving and hugging you if you're Mother Teresa, like Mother Teresa? Or was he more like William Wallace, the Braveheart? And he said that kind of depends on who you were. If you were an oppressive person, Jesus was coming at you like William Wallace. If you were a broken outcast of society, he'd come to you like Mother Teresa. And there are some very brutal people in this world. And it seems like, well, since there are people who are going to be offended or upset if we tell the truth, therefore we don't need to tell these people and really just blast them with the truth that you're following a false religion and you're going out chopping people's heads off in the name of a false religion, that we don't need to blast them that because we might hurt people's feelings. And I just disagree. If people's feelings get hurt, people's feelings get hurt about Christianity all the time, just based on watching The Simpsons or something like that. It doesn't stop them. And so why should it stop us from talking about Islam?
Okay, thank you, David. Farhan, you want to answer that?
Sure. I don't think that it's about hurting feelings as much as the consequences that come as a result of what we're saying and doing. So, for example, if we come out and just attack Muhammad or make fun of Muhammad, what is the consequence of that? So I'm not against telling the truth at all. I'm not against being assertive. I'm not against, talking about relevant yet controversial issues. It's about how we do it and about the consequences that come from how we do whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's talking about Muhammad or talking about Islam. So that's what I think it comes down to. It's not just the feelings, but the consequences of how we deal with it.
Did you want to ask something back, or?
Sure.
Go ahead.
So I wanted to take it a little bit because we were talking about the challenge of Islam, and there's so much that can be said about that particular title. I guess one of the fears that the whole concept of Islamophobia is that some Muslims feel as if that there's fear that people are trying to spread fear about Islam, and they find themselves affected when they're going to airports or when they're going to certain cashiers or certain areas, that now, because everybody's always talking specifically about Islam and Muslims in a particular type of way, then now, even though that they're innocent, and now they have to deal with it. How would you respond to those Muslims?
I would say that that's just not our culture. There are people, I think there are reasons that there are many Muslims think like that, because in certain Islamic cultures around the world, if you start criticizing someone, you end up killing each other over the issue you're debating. We just don't do that. There are isolated cases of an individual who might do that, but when we discuss an ideology, we could blast the ideology, right? I mean, you and I could sit down and have a disagreement and argue all night long and completely disagree. We're not going to start killing each other. So when we talk about something like Islam, if you say, you start criticizing Islam and poking fun at Muhammad, then it's Islamophobic and you might go on a killing spree. People make fun of Jesus all the time. People make fun of all kinds of things all the time. It never crosses anyone's mind that, hey, we're going to go out and start a killing spree. Now, with that said, I think that sort of, guarding Islam from criticism, or not treating Islam the way you treat other ideologies, by poking fun of it or making fun of it on The Simpsons or South Park like that, by keeping it sort of insulated from that kind of response, I think that does more. I think that does more to instill fear in people's hearts, right? Because there's this one ideology out there that we're just not allowed to treat like that. Well, that makes me wonder why. And then I see beheadings in the name of that religion. That scares me. I think it would do much more to dispel people's fears and concerns about Islam if we were just allowed to talk about it without either being killed, as you would in a place like Pakistan if you criticize Islam, or being called a racist or a bigot for talking about the Quran. So I think it would do much more, both for Muslims living in the West and for non-Muslims, if we were allowed to just, hey, lighten up here. Let's talk about Islam just like we talk about anything else. Let's joke about it like we joke about anything else. I think that would actually help, rather than, hey, let's keep it all quiet, or you're racist or a bigot. That makes people nervous. That makes me nervous when I hear, I don't care what it is, it doesn't have to be Islam. If I hear, hey, you're not allowed to talk about that, or you're not allowed to make fun of that, you may make fun of anything else but not that, that scares me, right? Because I think there's something different about this thing over here.
Mm-hmm. Farhan?
Sure. Yeah, I think that there is an issue of freedom of speech, and then there's an issue of sensitivity. Like if I was in if I was in a professional environment or a work environment or in a church environment, I have to behave myself a certain type of way, and so I'm not gonna say things. I'm not gonna go in there go to a church making fun of Christianity, or I'm not gonna be at work knowing that there's a Muslim 2 feet away from me and making fun of Muhammad, because I'm sensitive to what that's going to do. It's gonna hurt the person's feelings, and it's gonna cause harm. And it's not just an issue of hurting their feelings. It could lead to all sorts of psychological trauma. It's not just an issue of hurting feelings. These events are traumatic and can have long-term effects on people. This is something that we know and we've studied. And so there's an issue of freedom of speech, which I respect, which you're talking about. I think all traditions should be treated equally, and whether they make fun of them or don't make fun of them. Personally, I think we should be sensitive and not make fun of any religion or any race or any nationality. But I think that people should have the freedom to do so, every bit as people should have the freedom of not listening to that garbage. And so, I think it's an issue of being sensitive, and when you take it to the level of newspapers and professionals and politicians and theologians and pastors, I think that there's a certain way to act, and there's a certain obligation to be sensitive of human beings, knowing that this could cause trauma or harm.
I think we're about to get closer to a kind of solution here, because you're pointing out that criticizing Muhammad and criticizing Muhammad like we would criticize other things, that could lead to a psychological trauma and so on. I think that's the problem. CL, you encounter people making fun of Jesus all the time, right? TV shows,
Yes.
right?
Actually, I just saw today someone posted a prayer on Facebook, and someone replied with laughter.
Yeah, and I say that all the time. Every time I open Facebook. Are you psychologically traumatized from that?
Some of it can make me upset, but I don't know if I would go as far as saying psychologically.
Yeah, and I don't know any Christians who are sort of psychologically traumatized by the constant, endless ridicule of Christianity. But Farhan is right. Farhan is right. Muslims can get very, very upset
Yes.
about criticism of Muhammad. But I think the
Yes.
reason for that, Farhan, is that Islam has been insulated from a lot of the criticism, right? The Simpsons have never made fun of Islam. South Park tried to. They got threatened with death, and then they censored a ton of the episodes so that it wasn't offensive. So what I think the problem is, human beings can get used to just about anything. If Islam were treated the way other things are treated, now in a world like you're saying, well, we just shouldn't make fun of anything, that's fine. But we actually live in a world where people make fun of anything they disagree with, and that can be bad in one way. I think it's great in another way, in that we don't start killing and slaughtering people that we disagree with. We start making fun of them, and the reason that's good is, historically, lots of people down through history and lots of people in various places in the world today, if you have a disagreement, you start killing and slaughtering each other. Here in the West, if we have a disagreement, we start making fun of each other and poking fun at each other. And so again, that's bad, because you're talking about things that are important to people. You're talking about Jesus. You're talking about the Bible. You're talking about things that people hold very dear. But hey, you're not killing people over it, and in that I rejoice. And so what I would like to see is Muslims be brought into that sort of environment, that sort of cultural ideal where, hey, yeah, people are going to make fun of Muhammad. People are going to hurt your feelings. People might burn the Quran, but they're not killing you. They're not slaughtering you. So be happy that things aren't getting handled the way ISIS handles them or the way Boko Haram handles them. Be happy that people aren't killing and slaughtering each other. And that can only happen if we sort of break through a lot of the past and get to the point where Muslims are used to the fact that, hey, over here you won't get killed for it, but people can ridicule it, and the only way to do that is to kind of do it. And so, yes, it's rough. You and I, by the way, I like sitting on my bed and reading all day. I'm criticizing Islam because I think it has to be done, not for my benefit, but for the benefit of the world and even for the benefit of Muslims. I think Muslims themselves are much better off if they get it through their heads that they don't have to be psychologically traumatized because some guy over here makes fun of Muhammad, or some guy down in Florida burns a Quran. You don't have to freak out about it. But it kind of won't happen unless they get through that situation. Everyone else has had to do that, right? Every other group has had to get through that. Hey, everyone's making fun of me, and it's okay. I'm not getting killed. And I want to sort of bring Muslims into that community with everyone else. I don't see how they're worse off for that.
Mm-hmm. Farhan, your reply?
So a few things. I think asking CL, how he handles is kind of anecdotal. Maybe he doesn't have a short fuse. Maybe he doesn't have the chemistry and the life story that somebody else has, who would react in a different way. In theory, there could be a Christian who sees the thing and is traumatized by it, who watches South Park and sees Jesus being portrayed a certain type of way and is traumatized by it. Just because CL doesn't mean that others aren't. And again, I'm not against criticizing Islam. Definitely not against criticizing Islam. It's about how you do it, and it's about whether you're making fun of it and what the consequences of this is. If it's going to cause people to die, then you don't want to do it. And that's why South Park stopped doing it, because they wanted to see people stop dying. And here's my thing. If Christians aren't killing anyone when people make fun of Jesus, and Muslims are killing people when people make fun of Muhammad, it doesn't make it okay to criticize in either situation if it is truly traumatizing people. In the same sense, what I'm trying to say is you can't cancel out, Christians not doing it and Muslims doing it. People who are susceptible to these types of behavior are going to react. They're going to react, and they have reacted. And I would say that our culture is very different than what the culture is like in the Middle East. So there is a different social construct, different socioeconomic statuses, different levels of education, and primarily our culture is built to where we can have a little bit of a broader sense of humor. And we have to put that into perspective when dealing with Muslims who are brought up, even in the United States, they're being brought up in homes with a very different culture. And if that's the case, then that would define why Muslims are reacting the way that they are, is because the way that they're brought up, in addition to their biochemistry. So I'm for criticizing Islam. I'm for the freedom of speech. I think that our tactics are failing, and that's why we haven't confronted Islam in the right way, and that's why there's been more terrorism than there needs to be.
Let me give an example since we're on this topic of the cartoons in South Park. There was the Danish cartoons that were in the Jyllands-Posten. And cartoons were published, and there were riots around the world. So that was very offensive and caused all kinds of riots. Then South Park, in order to try and stand up for freedom of speech, decided to have Muhammad in their episode, like they'd had Jesus and Moses and God and everyone else in their episode. They're going to have Muhammad in an episode, and of course they're threatened with death. They backed down, not because they're trying to save lives on the other side of the planet. They were trying to save their own lives there. But after that, a woman named Molly Norris advocated, and everybody draw Muhammad Day, where she said, look, if thousands of people draw Muhammad, they can't kill everyone, so they're not even going to try. And she was threatened into silence. She backed out of it, said she condemns that sort of thing. But then there were thousands of people around the world who, just to clarify, I wasn't one of them, thousands of people around the world who drew cartoons of Muhammad. How many people died from those thousands of cartoons around the world being drawn about Muhammad? Zero. No one did. And why? Well, think about it. As long as it's a couple of people over there, or it's one guy there, you can threaten and intimidate those sorts of people. If it's thousands of people, well, there's not a lot you can do. And so when I think about what you're suggesting, it's, hey, these things could cause problems and cause riots, so don't do it. I think that's what causes the problem in the long run. As long as Muslims are used to their ideology being different and exempt from criticism, then the one or two people who manage to criticize it, then they can go after that person, they can kill that person, they can start the riots. Think about it. Salman Rushdie published the Satanic Verses. I mean, people died over that. He's still under death sentence. How many books on criticizing Islam have been published since then? Who's dying over them? No one. So if you think about it, it's sort of whoever starts it off, that person is a target and that person has to die. But after that, Muslims can get used to it. And see, what I believe that apart from the ideology, as far as human nature is concerned, Muslims are just like the rest of us, right? They have an ideology that I would reject, and I think the ideology is dangerous and violent. But as far as the person, I think the person is like the rest of us, and that you can kind of get used to things. And so this idea that we have to keep them insulated, and we have to tiptoe around them because we might hurt their feelings or psychologically traumatize them, I think it's the exact opposite. That if we sort of break through this wall, and there are people, making cartoons about Muhammad and doing this or that to the Quran and making YouTube videos, criticizing Muhammad or something like that, I think that very quickly that most Muslims can kind of get over the idea that Islam is exempt from criticism, and then I don't think you end up with psychologically traumatized people and people flipping out. Again, thousands of cartoons, no one dies. Why? People had got used to it very, very quickly. I think Muslims in general, just like everyone else, can get used to having their religion criticized. If we don't do that, we're sort of keeping the status quo where if one person stands up and does it, or this person stands up and does it, that person can get killed. So I think what you're suggesting is actually counterproductive and will lead to prolong. I mean, if we think 2 or 3 centuries from now, if we're still not allowed to criticize Islam the way we do everything else, I think you're going to have the same problems. If we actually deal with the problem now, get it through everyone's mind that hey, we can put Muhammad on TV anytime we want. We can put him on YouTube anytime we want. If you don't like it, don't watch it. If we get that through, if we get that idea through, then you don't have these problems 10 years from now, let alone 2 or 3 centuries from now.
Yeah, I'm not sure that if Islam is even going to exist a century from now, let alone a couple of centuries. Maybe we disagree about that as well, Dave. But when it comes to South Park, they have a particular rating, and they're not just making fun of Jesus and Muhammad. They're doing all sorts of obscene things. So if a person tunes into that program, they should be prepared to view things that are offensive. I'm not against, that type of freedom of speech if you're going to have the right precautions and make sure, that a certain age group and certain, population that is warned that this is the type of program it is, then then you can have that program. And there's a difference between criticizing Islam and then making fun of Islam, not in South Park, but in the general public. If the president of the United States or some politician started to make fun of Islam or Christianity for that matter, or even beyond politician, if a teacher was doing it in a classroom, if your kids were sent to a classroom and the teacher was making fun of Christianity, that's not fair to you as a family, and it's not fair to those kids who are going to be traumatized because and the Bible is being made fun of in a public school. And so there's times and places to use those types of freedom of speeches, those types of freedom of speech, and then there's places that are inappropriate, and we need to be more sensitive towards whether calling people towards sanity rather driving them more into insanity. And it all boils down to, because we kind of started about apologetics and whatnot. When we're inviting Muslims to consider alternative beliefs, we have to put into perspective whether we're pushing them away or whether we're opening their hearts to what we have to share. And in terms of those who are already hostile and rigid, are we making them more rigid and more hostile and more insane by what we're doing? And I think that's what it comes down to. And I'm definitely not against criticizing Islam or publishing books questioning, Islam or anything of that nature. It's how we do it. It's the words we choose, and it's our sensitivity to what's going on in the world and how people react psychologically. So I hope that explains my side of things a little bit.
Yes, we get your point and we get Dave's point. We're hearing you guys loud and clear. Now we're getting ready to go into a break, and we're going to come back shortly after our 1-minute break. And for the next 25 minutes, we're going to have a space of time so you, the audience out there, you can call in and you can voice your opinion about what's being discussed. Is Dave right? Is Farhan right? Maybe you have a completely different opinion that disagrees with both of them, and you want to school both of them. Well, this is your time to come on and school both of them. You wanted to say something?
Oh, we doing our little conclusions real quick?
Your conclusion? Oh, okay.
I think we get 3 minutes each.
3 minutes, okay. 3-minute conclusions each. Sorry about that.
All right, Farhan, you ready? Each do a 3-minute conclusion?
Go for it.
All right. All right, so Farhan and I, we agree on a lot of things. We agree that ISIS is a problem and terrorism is a problem. We agree that certain things about Muhammad need to be shared. We disagree on tactics. How confrontational should we be? I'm a bit more confrontational. I think that is what's needed. And when I say that, I don't mean that's what every person needs to do. I mean there need to be certain people who are taking a kind of more confrontational approach. Think about the situation we're in. Again, people are having their heads chopped off. If you look at the situation, it's not getting better, it's getting worse. We have lone wolf attacks here in the United States and Canada and Great Britain, and it looks like things are getting worse. Well, how are we going to do? What are we going to do about that? If you look, these people are, they're converting to Islam based on silly arguments. If the facts about Muhammad were common knowledge, if these facts were common knowledge I don't think a lot of these people would be converting to Islam if they really had a clue. And I'm basing that on the fact that everything they tell me about Muhammad is just wrong. It's wrong according to the Muslim sources. So I conclude if they actually knew the truth, the reality of Muhammad, I would say at least some of them certainly wouldn't have converted to Islam and wouldn't have lost their lives. So, I'm sure Farhan would agree that some of the facts about Muhammad need to become, be put into the public domain here. So it comes down to tactics. And, again, people think, hey, you're criticizing Islam, you're making fun of Muhammad, you're criticizing the Quran, you must hate Muslims. I'm thinking big picture. I'm thinking 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And when I look and I see that there are Muslims in the world who still get violent and will start killing people over cartoons or a YouTube video, I'd say here are people who need to get used to having their religion criticized. Are people going to have their feelings hurt? Are people going to get upset? Could people become angry over this? Sure, but if you're talking about the big picture, it seems like a wall that we need to get through. And again, I don't just think this is good for me or for Westerners. I think this is good for Muslims too. If we sort of win the free speech battle, which I would say needs to be won at all costs, if we get through that to where Islam is just as fair game as Christianity, so if a person doesn't want to criticize Christianity or Islam, that's fine. But if a person wants to criticize Islam or Christianity, he has that option without being killed. And so we have to break through that wall. I don't see any other way to do it other than just doing it. And feelings are going to get hurt, but I mean, come on, this is a religion that calls me the worst of creatures. This is a religion that commands its adherents to violently subjugate me. If that's not going to psychologically traumatize people, I don't see why they'd be psychologically traumatized by me telling them the facts about their prophet.
Thank you, David. And Farhan, your 3 minutes now.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, ABN. Thanks, CL, for having me. I think this is a very, very important topic that needs to be discussed over and over and over again between politicians, between apologists, and between the general public who's concerned about Islam. I think, how should we confront the Islamic challenge? And it's a great topic, and I'm glad that we finally had to discuss it a little bit. I do think that love ultimately wins. And one of my favorite Christian pastors, the name of his book is Love Wins. But anyways, love ultimately does win. It's what steals hearts. It's what transforms people into beautiful and more spiritual people. And I really do believe that hostility when hostility is fueled by more hostility, that it causes further chaos, more hurt, more trauma, and more animosity. And that's just generally speaking, from a psychological perspective, that's what happens. Whether we're talking about Islam or whether we're talking about any other topic, negativity fuels negativity, and love is what heals people. And so in terms of apologetics, no matter how rigid or hostile the opposition is, I really do believe that you should love your enemy and that you should turn the other cheek. And, eventually, even if their lives are lost and they're killing people and they're persecuting people, eventually love will win. And if their hearts won't be transformed, then, God willing, their children's hearts will. So that's the stance that I take. I respect Dave if he wants to, continue insulting and making fun of Muhammad. David is a brother of mine. I disagree with his tactics if he does that, and I think that there are better ways to engage Muslims.
Okay, thank you very much. And don't forget, we have 25 minutes where we're going to have the phone lines open after we come back from this break, and we'll be back in a moment. We're opening the phone lines up for the next 25 minutes to get some input from our audience. And we have 3 callers at the moment. And when our first caller tonight is Richard. And can we get Richard on the line?
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right, hello. My name is Richard Bush. I'm delighted to be on with you, and I'll be as fast as possible because I know that there are people on behind me. If we're considering bringing facts into the public arena, I wonder which facts would be most effective in the public arena. Perhaps we should consider bringing into the arena the historical facts about Jesus. I mean, for us to just expose embarrassing facts about Muhammad will have the effect that's sort of like when John died on the cross and said that Jesus' body was eaten by dogs. We just give this knee-jerk reaction, this emotionally charged reaction, rather than wanting to consider what he's saying because it's so offensive to us. So rather than just attacking Muhammad, it might be better to put out in the public arena facts about Jesus. And this will have a twofold effect. One, teaching people about Jesus, that he claimed to be God. He called men to worship him, even in the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark. And secondly, it would expose the Islamic claim that Jesus did not claim to be God. So in this way, people would be equally as skeptical about Islam as they would about if we put out the facts about Muhammad's life on the table. Yet Muslims might not be as defensive or angry as if we embarrass their beloved prophet. And at the same time, talking about Jesus would be a bridge to preaching the gospel. So do you think that centralizing our emphasis rather on Christ's claims about himself, his crucifixion, and his resurrection would be a more effective strategy?
Well, there's no conflict between the two, right? I mean, here we have programs all the time defending the deity of Christ, defending Jesus' death and resurrection. I've had multiple debates with Muslims on the resurrection and things like that. So there's no conflict between getting the facts about Jesus out there and getting the facts about Muhammad on the table. I'll say that both are important. My best friend in college was a guy named Qureshi who works with Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. But I'll tell you why both are important. Nabil didn't tell me this until after he became a Christian, but when he was an Ahmadi Muslim. But when we would argue about the resurrection and the deity of Christ and the reliability of the New Testament, Nabil got to a point where he didn't tell me this until later. He told me that he realized I had a strong case for Jesus' death by crucifixion and Jesus' resurrection and the deity of Christ and the reliability of the New Testament. So he agreed with me that I had a good case, but he thought to himself, even if David shows me with 99% certainty that all of these things are true, I am still 100% certain that Islam is true. And so Islam wins. Islam wins because he has complete confidence in Islam. He said it wasn't until later when he started to doubt Islam based on us going through facts about Muhammad and about Muhammad's history that he started to doubt Islam. And then he was able to sort of put everything on the table. But when we were just sharing facts about the deity of Christ and the resurrection, he was still completely confident that Islam is 100% certain. And that's kind of what we need to get facts about Muhammad and Islam on the table, because there are lots of Muslims who think like that because that's all they've ever been exposed to. So think about it. If a Muslim all his life has only been exposed to the claim that Islam is 100% certain and it's proven by science and proven by history and proven by logic and proven by reason and proven by everything, and we don't share the truth with them, then that's all they've heard. They've gotten one side of the issue. I believe Muslims need both sides of the issue so that they can make a more informed decision. That's true about the facts about Christianity and the facts about Islam. So I'm for all the facts on the table as much as possible.
Thank you. Are we going to let Farhan?
If Farhan wants to respond, he can, or we can go on to the next caller.
Farhan, do you want to respond, or you just want to go to the next caller?
No, I agree with Dave. We can go to the next caller.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Richard. We thank you for that call. And our next caller is Vincent. Vincent, are you there? Vincent?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. What is
Okay,
your
I'm
question for our debaters tonight?
Well, I have a question but a short comment. I'm going to stick to the subject of what you're... Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, how should we confront the Islamic challenge? And the short answer is, at least in my personal opinion, is simply get off your land. And I'll use this analogy. If I broke into David's house and I subjugated him, his wife, his children, didn't leave, wouldn't let them leave. But every day I saw him, I teased and put down his belief. Oh, your God was a rapist. He ain't real. He ain't this. I think what it does is add insult to injury. I think the short answer is, if you want to confront the Islamic challenge, get off your land. Because if someone invaded here, if someone invaded Christian land, you would do whatever you had to do, not to save your God, but to save your family, to save the people you love. And these people, these humans, like we all are no different than anybody else. No one knows the path of God. We all guess it. And you give merit to your guess by your actions, not by your words. I appreciate the call, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, I'll let Farhan add to this. I'll just say one quick thing. President Obama took office, and he said, we are getting off their land, right? We're getting out of Iraq. And his military advisors say if you do that, there are some radical dudes who are ready to take over. And nope, we are getting off their land because us being there is the problem. Let's get off the land. They got off the land, and now the situation is ISIS. So if you're just saying, hey, pull out completely, by the way, I'm not for the war and so on, but I mean, I'm for practical consequences. Think, what is preventing ISIS from just annihilating everyone? They're growing. They have 1,000 new foreign soldiers coming in every month from around the world. The idea, hey, just get out of there and they'll all be happy. No, they'll all be beheaded by ISIS. And so, as much as you don't like the United States and what they've done, and again, I think the United States has done all kinds of stupid things. I think that's kind of the ruling policy is let's do some of the dumbest things we can possibly do. But just this blanket, hey, let's stay out of it, you're going to end up with a lot of suffering people over there because the people who are vying for power right now are a lot worse than anything the United States is going to do. In other words, we are at a point in history where I don't care if it comes from the United States or from from the countries over there. Someone needs to defend people against ISIS. So the idea, just get out of there and everything will be okay. No, get out of there and everything is going to be subjugated by the Islamic State.
Okay. Farhan, do you have something to say about that?
I think I agree with David on that one as well. I wish it was as simple as just get the military, or get the troops, or get America out of their lands. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's an idealistic, but it's not. It's not realistic at all. And history has shown that at this point it's not realistic. ISIS is the obvious. Everything David basically said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vincent. We thank you for calling and expressing yourself. And we have a third caller. I believe it's Shakir. Are you there? Shakir?
Okay. So first, congratulations for the new channel. And then for Dr. David, okay. So for Dr. David, and actually I appreciate your effort and your opinion about Islam, which cannot withstand criticism. Actually, I think that you are following what's happening in the Middle East these days and about the apologetics to the extent that in Egypt especially there are someone like apologetic called Islam al-Bahiri. He is now starting to say what is written inside this al-Bukhari and saying that it cannot be accepted, and also like Ibrahim Isa is saying the same. And also there is another one called Hamad Abdul Samad. He says that the ayat al-Salm in Quran should abrogate ayat al-Harb. This is contrary to what is happening these days. They say that this ayah of which is in Surah al-Qital, they say that it abrogated all the peace verse from the Quran. He is saying that we should make not make the reverse. They want to abrogate the verses of struggle. So first, the question now: is Islam liable to reformation or not? The question is Islam liable to information or not?
The question is, can Islam be reformed? And I would say, on a personal level, on the level of the person, Islam can be reformed. In other words, as we've already discussed, an individual can interpret the Quran. I could pick up the Quran and think it means anything that I want it to mean. So on a personal, individual level, Islam can be reformed, and that's why you have plenty of nice, peaceful Muslims that would be some of the nicest people you've ever met. But at the same time, there is a core there, and there's a reason that a lot of the the terrorist attacks and things like that seem to be coming out of one particular ideology. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, the Quran claims over and over again to be perfectly clear in its commands, right? The Quran says over and over again, these are the verses of the clear book. These are the verses that are explained in detail. These are the books that are expounded in detail. It says things like this over and over again. The commands of the Quran are supposedly clear. And then you have Allah over and over again demanding complete submission and obedience. So 465 says that Muslims can have no faith until they make Muhammad judge in all decisions and find in themselves no resistance to his commands. And so if you look at that and say, well, Allah says it's clear. Allah says I can have no real faith. I'm not a real Muslim unless I make Muhammad the judge and I have no resistance against Muhammad's decisions. Then when you open Muhammad's decisions and find something about, killing apostates or something like that, that's Islam, right? That's Islam. So a person can interpret Islam however he wants. Islam is what it is. The nice Muslim who lives down the street or the Muslim who reinterprets it is not, has never been, and never will be an authoritative source of Islamic doctrine or practice. Islam is what it is. And so there are always going to be the problems because, as Farhan points out, that there are different people, different kinds of people who do things differently. There are always going to be the kinds of people who say, look, if this is my religion, I'm going to do whatever it says. Let me open it up. I don't care what anyone else says. I'm just going to do whatever this commands me. And they're going to open it up and read, fight those who do not believe in Allah. Or they're going to open it up and read, if anyone leaves this Islamic religion, chop off his head. So that's what that's the problem, is that you have different kinds of people. Yeah, lots of people will interpret things peacefully, but there are the sorts of people, I'm one of them, CL is one of them, who say, if I'm going to follow something, that's what I'm going to follow, and I'm going to do what it says. And those kinds of people, I think, will always open up the Quran, find it, and I think you're going to have jihad. So can it just be completely reformed as a religion? I don't think so. Again, on a personal basis, yeah. As far as Islam itself, Islam, it's already been defined.
Farhan, do you have some input on that?
Sure, I think Dave has a legit point with that. I think when you look at neuroscience, you have the two hemispheres of the brain, the right brain and the left brain. And generally speaking, we use the entire brain, but there is definitely certain people who incline towards a literalistic approach to life in general, not just scripture, but life in general. And so they view and perceive everything quite literally. And then there's others who see the more abstract, who see the gray rather than the black and white. And the chemistry influences their outlook and their perception on life. So David, being quite a literalist, interprets things quite literally, and so when he reads the Bible, he's thinking that, okay, this is literal. Whereas somebody else who thinks more in the abstract might look at the Bible and interpret it metaphorically. Now, who's right and who's wrong, we're not going to get into it. But the idea is that people do perceive these things differently. I think that that when the baby boomers die off, which is, my parents and a lot of our parents, Dave, probably your parents are baby boomers. I don't know. CL, I don't know if your parents are baby boomers. But they're very traditional, right? And our grandparents were extremely traditional. But even with the baby boomers, as traditional as they were open up to diversity and plurality like never before in history, especially in the United States. But, even with the internet and globalization and all that. And so they're exposed to a lot more information. And I think when the baby boomers die off, and then when our generation dies off, I think that the future generations are going to perceive things a little bit differently. I think that will call for a more metaphorical interpretation of Islam for the future generations if they're going to be reasonable with what's there in science and in psychology and sociology and all these, all of these academia fields. That they're going to perceive Islam differently, and then eventually Islam is going to phase out. If I were to make a prediction, that's what I think is going to happen.
Thank you very much. And we thank you, Shakir, for your call. And we move on to our next caller. Vincent. Sorry.
No, this is Radical Moderate.
Oh,
Radical
no.
Moderate. Oh.
There goes the show. Cut it off.
I got a couple points. Well, a question and a point if we got time.
Uh-huh.
First thing is for Farhan. You crazy hippie, you. I was listening. I was listening to an NPR show a while ago, and they had a psychologist on who was working in the Middle East, and she said basically that the whole culture of the Middle East seems to be one of whoever feigns outrage first, whoever yells the loudest that they've been insulted when two people or groups of people are interacting. Those are the people who win the argument, who win the debate. In other words, someone says, oh, you've insulted me, and then the other person is taken back and apologizing for insulting the person, even if they didn't, and that seems to kind of set the tone. Do you got any thoughts on that?
You're directing that to Farhan?
Yeah, that was Farhan.
Yeah, to Farhan, yes.
Yeah, I think that culturally speaking, that there are those types of things that are there. The more dominant, because they're very authoritarian, totalitarian type of culture, or at least it's coming from the past into the present. They have been very authoritarian, and so showing that dominance is definitely. Psychologically, it proves something to them. But I think that the human dynamics are a little bit more elaborate and complicated than that. And so, but I think that you're right, Rad. I do think that is an accurate stereotype, if you will.
Thank you. All right. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm good with that.
Good? Good. All right, thank you, Red Moderate, for calling in and schooling these guys who think they know something. We're moving on to our next caller, and we have on the line Mark. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, we hear you.
Can you turn Mark up a little?
Yeah.
Yeah, turn me up a little.
Okay, Mark, tell us your question or some of your wisdom.
All right, we'll see if I give any wisdom. Well, I've been watching things on TV for some time now, what's going on with Islam, and it just seems like there's something inherently wrong in the religion that is being passed on to its adherents, its people, like the Muslim young men who throw acid in the face of another Muslim woman because she doesn't want to marry him or date him, or like I was just watching Frontline and about ISIS a few days ago, and it was showing where ISIS was taking over in the Shiite areas. They were murdering the Shiites in the streets, and they had them tied up and they were shooting them in the head with an AK, and they act like 2-year-olds. They have no self-control over themselves, and I think it's something inherently being taught to them by their religion.
Okay. So who wants to go first on that one?
Yeah, I will. What I was certain Muslims can do things that aren't actually commanded by the religion. So you don't open up the Quran and find throw acid in the faces of women. What you do find is sort of a lot of commands about women being submissive and so on, and that if women are getting out of line, men want to teach them a lesson, men want to punish them. So you do have that sort of trend in Islam, and this can erupt in various ways, and one of those would be throwing acid in women's faces. As far as ISIS, shooting Shias, that goes within that you can defend. Surah 9, verse 73 of the Quran commands Muslims to wage jihad against unbelievers and hypocrites. So if you regard Shia as a hypocrite, you would think, well, I'm commanded to wage jihad. So yeah, we do have this problem, but one of the interesting things was, I didn't catch it until Farhan was giving his conclusion, but we have sort of different views of love, whereas Farhan has he's associating the love with niceness and kindness. I think you can blast someone in love. In other words, when Jesus says, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites," I don't believe he's being hateful. I think that's the most loving thing he could do. In other words, if my friend Farhan here, if he walks out of his house tomorrow and says, "Hey, I can fly," I'm going to tell him how ridiculous that is. If he became delusional and thought he could fly, I'm going to tell him how ridiculous that is. If he goes up on top of a building to demonstrate, I'm actually going to tackle him. Not because, oh, I'm so violent and I want to tackle Farhan. No, because look, that's about the most loving thing I can do in that situation. And as you pointed out, there is just atrocity after atrocity after atrocity every time I turn on the news. And so, I think someone needs to shout. I think someone needs to start shouting, in a metaphorical sense, where we need to start laying it down and stop pulling punches with Islam and walking on tippy toes around it. We need to lay out the truth and say, look, guys, this isn't true. It's not true. It's not true. Stop killing and doing all the things you're doing for it.
Thank you, David. And Farhan, do you have something to say about this particular statement and topic?
I didn't catch the statement entirely. I caught David's response. Maybe we can. I'll just go with what David said. I do want to say, in terms of what David said about love, the way that I define is unconditional, an unconditional embrace of anyone and everyone, bar none. So meaning that there's no conditions on me embracing you, and that's what God does. God is unconditional love. God loves unconditionally. But embracing or accepting people unconditionally I agree with it, could include an assertive, outside of kindness type of approach. I wouldn't disagree with that type of definition of love. I'm not sure if Dave and I agree whether it's conditional or unconditional, though. But that's a different topic.
Okay. And we have one more caller, Jose.
Yes, I'm on.
Okay,
yeah,
we hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead with your statement or question.
Yeah, I have 3 questions, actually.
Go ahead.
The first question I'd like to ask is, who validated Muhammad's prophethood? Because I know that when he went to the cave, he thought that he might have been possessed by being afflicted by demons, by demon jinn. And then he also thought that it was might have been a demon that visited him. But who was the one who validated his prophethood? Mm-hmm. Because maybe he was right the first time.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jose, we only have a couple minutes left before we have to cut off the show, so please give us your other questions real quick, and then we'll have to answer them sort of rapid fire.
The other question is, why did the Jews want to kill Jesus? If he affirmed their beliefs, like the Torah, the Old Testament, why did the Jews want to kill Jesus? The Quran says that that he seemed like he went along with the whole program. It's like, why did the Jews want to kill him then?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll answer those, and then Farhan can add anything he wants. Who validated Muhammad's prophethood? Muslims could say it was validated later on by various things, but at the earliest stage, yeah, you're right. Muhammad thought he was demon possessed. He tried to hurl himself off a cliff. Whatever it was that was addressing him wouldn't let him. Muhammad goes back. He's suicidal. He's calling on Khadija to cover him, but it's Khadija and Waraka who said, no, you're not possessed. You're a prophet. And so that's the first validation. That's the first claim that Muhammad is a prophet, as far as something that Muhammad believed. As far as why the Jews would want to kill Jesus, that is a good question, and I brought this up to Muslims before, because it makes perfect sense, if the Christian view is correct, that people would want to kill Jesus, because Jesus is going around making claims that only God should be making about himself, and the records of Jesus' trial and so on. That's exactly what he was accused of: blasphemy. The Muslim perspective, where Jesus is going around telling people just believe in God, you'd wonder who would get angry at that, who in first century Israel would get mad at that sort of Jesus. And so Muslims will say it's something about claiming to be the Messiah or something like this, or he was a threat to their power or something like that. But doesn't exactly fit much, because there were tons of people in first century Israel who were winning followers going around telling people, hey, believe in God, serve God. It's not clear who Jesus would have offended. But yeah, Muslims would generally say, he was, what he was doing was an affront to the religious leaders or something like that.
Okay, we have very little time left, so Farhan, you want to get in there and say what you have to say, something about that question? Or that
sure. I also believe that Muhammad had some sort of mystical experience in the cave. Now, whether that was temporal lobe epilepsy, whether it was sleep paralysis, or due to sleep deprivation or whatever, he had some sort of mystical experience, and he believed that he was demon possessed. And who validated that he was a prophet was Waraka bin Nawafal, who was the uncle of Khadija, and he was some type of Christian. I don't think he was an Orthodox Christian. I think he was a heterodox Christian. and he was teaching him Christianity among others. And he was telling him that he's a prophet of God. He was telling him, Muhammad never thought it was Gabriel. Waraqah bin Nawafil told him it was Jibreel, if you read the hadith. Now, in regards to the Jews, and Jesus was claiming divinity. He was claiming to be the I am, and he's claiming to be the Moshiach, and that upset the Jews to the point where they did what they did what they did according to the Bible.
Okay. So I believe we have one last caller. No caller left?
No, I think we're
What?
one. Oh, okay.
That's it. Okay.
Good. We're out of time anyway. So.
Yes, we are out of time. This was a wonderful show. The topic again was how should we confront the Islamic challenge. You heard from both of our speakers today, Farhan Qureshi and David Wood, both came with their points. So this is a topic for you to continue to think about and continue to ask yourself, how should we deal with the Islamic challenge? And we're basically out of time at this point. So keep tuning into the Trinity channel. There are going to be more shows. The marathon is continuing. And don't forget, it is time to wake up. Now is the time for you to wake up and come into the light of the Lord Jesus Christ. Thank you very much for tuning in.